Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe, your home for horror, fantasy, and science fiction. I am your shopkeeper, Chris Baker, and today we've got a curious little item. This item teeters on the line between life and death and is a reimagining or a readaptation of a graphic novel in a 1990s film. So without further ado, let's pull out the kinetoscope and take a look at the new adaptation of The Crow. So a little housekeeping before we get into The Crow. I've been off for a couple weeks, and honestly, I didn't know if I was going to be coming back to doing the show. Another one of these, existential, not a midlife crisis, but just, I don't know. I just had a lot of things going on. We had these two kittens we were about to adopt, and something happened with them, and we lost these two kittens. I'm not going to get into the details on that, but that was quite traumatic. My wife got really sick after that, and it's just been a whole thing. And I doing a podcast, I say I do it just because I love this, but I also want to have an audience. I want to build an audience, and if I don't get an audience numbers that I feel I'm looking for, I'm not looking for grandiose numbers, but, I wasn't getting the numbers I was looking for as far as downloads and plays, and it just got a little frustrating, and I do this because I just said doo-doo, sorry. I do this because I love talking about movies and talking about TV and streaming and horror, fantasy, and science fiction. But also, I want to feel like I'm doing this for a reason, because people care about what I have to say. And if you're listening to this, you're one of those people, and I thank you more than you can ever know. But ultimately, I thought, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not getting the numbers I would like to see. I'm not getting the growth I would like to see in our audience. And I was going to quit. I was going to stop doing this and just go watch things just for the sheer enjoyment. But at somewhere along the way, I decided that, I do love talking about this, and I'm going to drive my wife nuts by talking about all this stuff with her about movies she's never going to see and doesn't care about. So I thought, I am going to keep doing this podcast, but because even if I don't get the numbers that I want to feel like this is being successful as a podcast. I'm not doing this for money, but I do want to build an audience. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I do like talking about this with you. And if you're listening to this, you're the reason why I'm keeping going, why I'm still doing this. So we're back. And, we're going to do The Crow today. On Thursday, I'm going to play a little catch-up. Saw Alien Romulus while I was taking a couple weeks off and really enjoyed that. So we'll talk about that on Thursday's show. And I am going to try and streamline things. Like I said, I'm doing a little housekeeping right here. But we're going to try and jump into the topic of the episode quicker. I'm not doing the intro that I used to do, trying to make this more accessible to new listeners who are just coming on and they just want to get right into it and don't really understand the whole theater of the mind thing I was trying to do with the intro and episodes past. So, like I said, trying to streamline the show to make it more accessible to a bigger audience. And if that happens, great. If not, I do just enjoy sitting here talking with you about horror, fantasy, and science fiction. So let's get on with it. The Crow. I have to say, I am a huge fan of The Crow. I was first introduced to it with the 1994 film. And after that, I ended up getting the graphic novel that it was based off of, which came out in the late 80s. I know James O'Barr was working on this Crow graphic novel series throughout the 80s, but I think it released late 80s, 89, somewhere around there, 90, 91, before the movie came out in 94. And I was just a huge fan of it. Huge fan of both things. The graphic novel is great in its own way, and the Alex Proyas movie from 94 is great in its way. And it really, I think, embodies what I didn't like about this new Crow adaptation, because the James O'Barr graphic novel had a certain soul to it, and the Alex Proyas film in 94 felt like a reincarnation of that soul, but still the same soul. One of my biggest problems with this new adaptation of The Crow is it felt like it had no soul. And we'll get into that. Like I said, I am going to try to keep this pithy and try and, not ramble too much about things, but we are going to talk about some of the things I didn't like about this adaptation. And there were a couple things that I did like, but that just couldn't save this film for what made me not enjoy this. Now, I've heard a lot of people talking about this film and how, one of the podcasters I really enjoy listening to, and I have a lot of great respect for him, is John Campea. And listening to him talk about this, not the film itself, but the trailer and all the hubbub around things like Alex Proyas coming out and bashing the film before it ever came out and that sort of thing. And I know like people like John Campea were saying that, you got to take this film on its own merit. And while I do agree with that to an extent, you also have to understand, this is based on intellectual property. This is based off a comic series, a graphic novel series, that if you're not going to at least try to stay true to that, you're going to upset fans. And that's what happened here. This was The Crow in name only and almost the most vaguest of terms as far as how the story went. It was kind of like Rupert Sanders and the screenwriters, William Schneider and Zach Balan. It's like they said, okay, we've got this really cool movie, but it feels like a Crow ripoff. So, hey, you Lionsgate, you've got the Crow rights. Can we make this a Crow movie? And I'll just throw in some of the Crow lore and I'll make up some shit that I think is really cool, but doesn't have anything to do with the James O'Barr graphic novel. It's kind of what this film felt like. And it makes me wonder how this movie would have been different if one of the other iterations of this Crow remake, or maybe not even a remake, but it's a readaptation of it, because there were a lot of people tied to it over the years. Bradley Cooper, Luke Evans, all were talked about. Jason Momoa talked about him playing Eric, and a lot of different directors and writers have been tied with this over the past decade or more. And I wonder what we would have got if one of those iterations came about, if it would have felt like a more of a faithful adaptation of James O'Barr's graphic novel, if it would have felt like a more closely related remake of the Alex Proyas, Brandon Lee adaptation that we got in '94. But, those didn't happen. This did. It almost felt like a Lionsgate, hey, we've got this, we've got to get a Crow movie out or we're going to lose the rights. It had that vibe to it, and that's why we got what we got. And like I said, this just felt like a movie that didn't have any soul to it, because they focused too much on an important aspect, but an aspect of this movie that you could have portrayed much quicker, like they did in the '94 adaptation, like James O'Barr did in the graphic novel. It's the romance between Eric and Shelley, where in the graphic novel, you get more instances of it, but like with the graphic novel, Eric is the Crow right off the bat. You jump right into it. He's already risen from the grave. He's already exacting revenge on the people that killed him and Shelley. And you get all of these moments with him and Shelley through flashback. And there's a lot of them throughout the whole graphic novel series. Alex Proyas did the same thing. We got a little bit, I don't even know if we got any like present day. I think we first meet up with Eric and Shelley after the murders, and he shows Eric and Shelley's relationship through flashbacks, and in not nearly as many flashbacks as James O'Barr did in the graphic novel, but in the limited amount of time that he used to show the flashbacks of Eric and Shelley's relationship, it was so impactful. You cared about these characters. Eric Draven, you realize, was was a good guy and a fun guy and a funny guy. He was in a rock band and he was all, goth and whatever, but he was a fun guy and a nice guy, and they had a beautiful relationship. And Alex Proyas and Brandon Lee, and I can't remember the actress who played Shelley, but they really portrayed that, and you learn to love these characters through, I don't know, maybe like 5 minutes of flashbacks total throughout the whole 94 Crow movie. You had a connection with these characters. You love these characters. You love their relationship. It showed their relationship as something good and pure. And that's where this movie missed the mark, because they spent at least the first 2 acts of this movie showing this relationship between Eric and Shelley and how they met. And they met in a completely different way in this. They did this whole like prison rehab sort of place where they met. And it really made these characters not likable, being addicts. And that's not to say addicts can't be sympathetic characters, but they didn't make these characters sympathetic. They were good people to a degree, but they get out of rehab and they're spending the weekend together or whatever and just getting drunk and high again. And it's like, well, you were in rehab for a reason, and now you're out just, fucking and doing Molly and drinking somebody else's expensive champagne. And they just weren't very likable characters. And the Eric character, played by Bill Skarsgård, who I absolutely loved, but it felt very much like his character from Hemlock Grove. Just very emo and sad and pouty. And, well, that character from Hemlock Grove was interesting at times. That got a little old. And this character, this iteration of Eric got a little old because, he just was kind of just always down, and there wasn't really anything to like about them or their relationship. And when you're spending this much time focusing on the relationship, I fucking better care about the relationship when it all comes down to it. I think that's where things were done right with James O'Barr's graphic novel and Alex Proyas's adaptation, is that when we meet Eric and Shelley, they've already been in a long relationship. They've already been, they've been engaged, and we're meeting them at kind of like the height, at the zenith of their relationship. And you can feel that history between them in the flashbacks in both the 94 adaptation and James O'Barr's graphic novel. In this, we're supposed to believe that he would die for her. He would sacrifice his soul for her because they spent a wild weekend together. And it just didn't have the depth of character. It didn't have the depth of relationship that the original graphic novel or the 94 adaptation had. And that really is kind of what you need. You need this relationship to work. You need people to care about this relationship. And I didn't care about this relationship because I didn't care about either of the characters. Like I said, Bill Skarsgård's a good actor and I really enjoy him, but this, and it may have been just the writing, but this character was flat. It was so one-note emo that I couldn't find myself wanting to like him. FKA Twigs, who I'm not familiar with her. She's like a pop star or something in England. I like her acting wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great either. It really felt like a dollar store Mia Goth ripoff. Just in her delivery, very higher pitched. I don't know. There was something about her delivery. I think Mia Goth is a good actress, but this just felt like kind of a knockoff of that. And I really didn't care about her. Another thing I really didn't like about this movie is they took what is essentially a simple premise and just over fucking complicated it. I love the line that Sarah gives at the beginning of the 94 The Crow. I can't remember if that line is in the graphic novel anywhere. It's been a while since I've read that, but I know from the movie, Sarah has that voiceover at the beginning. People once believed that when someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead, but sometimes something so bad happens that a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the soul can't rest. Then sometimes, just sometimes, the crow can bring the soul back to put the wrong things right. And that is really the essence of The Crow. Both the graphic novel and the 94 adaptation is that Eric and Shelley were killed tragically, different from the graphic novel to the 94 adaptation, but killed tragically, and in that tragedy, the Eric character, his soul can't rest, and the crow brings him back to take care of his unfinished business. It's very simple and done very well in the graphic novel. It done very well in the 94 adaptation. Like I said, both different from the other, similar but different. And in this, they took that idea and tried to add more lore to it. The whole thing about Danny Huston, and I love Danny Huston. I think he plays a wonderful bad guy, and he did in this, but the bad guy was just so fucking... the whole thing about him making a deal with the devil, and this deal, he sacrifices innocent souls to go to hell in his stead so he can have long life. He's hundreds of years old, and he also like sucks some of their blood or draws some of their blood into him. This whole thing, and he has his curiosity piqued with the Eric character because he has the power of the crow, and he's got these powers of a god, and he wants those too. So if he takes his soul, it's just so fucking overly complicated for something that doesn't have to be complicated. This is a revenge story. This is all about revenge. And it's revenge in the graphic novel. It is about dealing with grief and loss. And this made it into some fucking like weird straight to video vampire-y type story that just didn't fit the crow. It wasn't necessary to expand on that. The whole thing about the crow going to this limbo and talking to this guy that would see you later as an EMT, and it just didn't make any sense when it was all said and done. Going through this whole thing about he has the power of a god. That didn't need to be in it. That takes away from the simplicity of just sometimes a soul comes back from the dead to make the wrong things right. And there's a beauty and there's an artistry in that simplicity that makes The Crow, the graphic novel, and the 94 adaptation so good because they didn't try to over-egg the pudding. And this is a situation where they over-egged the pudding and it was just too much. Too much nonsense that didn't have anything to do with what the actual essence of the story is. A gang of guys kills Eric and Shelley, and Eric comes back and systematically, one by one, kills everybody until he gets to the leader and kills that leader, the person behind it all. Where in this, yeah, he killed a couple of the people involved, but it really wasn't like a gang of people. There was a bunch of just like goons and henchmen that were killed in a pretty cool fight scene. We'll talk about that coming up. And then it came down to him and Danny Huston's character, Rogue, and taking him to the limbo area, the crow world, and having the demons get him. It was lame. It really was lame, and took and made what I know James O'Barr, given the fact that this is a supernatural story, a guy coming back from the dead to avenge he and his wife's murder. That's a supernatural story. But there were even aspects of the 94 adaptation, the supernatural aspects that he didn't care for, like with Top Dollar's sister, the witch who could see the future and liked people's eyeballs and stuff like that, and her trying to steal the power of the crow, and the whole bit about the, if you hurt the crow, you hurt Brandon Lee's Eric Draven, and I know James O'Barr didn't really care for that kind of supernatural stuff. So I can't imagine what he must think of this new adaptation, because it is all added supernatural aspects that just don't need to be and didn't add anything to the story and actually detracted from the story because half of it was stupid. And this whole artificial timeline thing, race against the clock, because if Bill Skarsgård's Eric doesn't kill Danny Huston's character, Shelley's going to be lost and damned to hell forever. And the whole making the deal with the guy in Crow World about, swapping his soul for Shelley so she'll live, so she's going to come back to life. And I wasn't sure how that was going to work out. And it worked out just as lame as I thought it was going to. And maybe not lame, but it was just like, okay, so all this stuff happened, But it didn't happen because we're back when they were first originally killed and she lived and he died. And it made no sense. It was fucking it's not confusing. It's just poor writing. We want to make it so he sacrifices himself and she lives. And we're not really sure how to get there cohesively, so we're just gonna do shit, and it's just, people won't care. They won't notice at the end. I'm sure it's probably what they were thinking when they wrote this crap. And I know it's probably not fair to compare this movie to the 94 adaptation in a style-wise, because the 94 adaptation really was a sign of the times. It was very stylistic to the 90s. It had an ambiance and a 90s energy about it. The soundtrack was all bands of that time, Nine Inch Nails, doing that cover of Joy Division's Dead Souls. You had The Cure with Burn, Stone Temple Pilots, My Life with Thrill Kill Cult, just a ton of great bands of that era, and kind of a really cool alt-rock edge to it that really helped with, with the style of this movie and the feel of this movie. And you could tell that they were trying to emulate that to a degree in this. As far as aesthetically, the looks of it, didn't feel very stylistic. It felt very weird. Like, instead of Eric dressed up in leather pants and a rock and roll long sleeve shirt, he's wearing like a black tracksuit and like this nylon trench coat. It was like they were trying to make it cool, like an updated version of The Crow, and it'll look really neat. But it did not look neat. It looked a little lame. With that and his like white tennis shoes, like he's fucking Run DMC. It was just, the look of The Crow was awful. They had he got the black crow blood, and that made his eyes. No, actually, I think that was tattoo ink. And the look of the face paint on the crow was stupid. It didn't emulate. I get it that it didn't emulate the 94 adaptation and it should be its own thing, but the 94 adaptation emulated what James O'Barr did in the graphic novel. So, you know what? I would think it would behoove the filmmakers to fucking, at least try to make it look like James O'Barr's The Crow and not do their own thing. But style-wise, it just didn't look very stylistic. The soundtrack was very all over the place. You had Enya in that scene where he becomes the Crow, where he does the makeup, and it was just really weird. That same song that they used in that Stephen King movie, Sleepwalkers. It was that same Enya song, and it just seemed so out of place. There were a couple of more rockin', modern alternative songs that I thought, oh, okay, I see they're trying to emulate that alt-rock sound of the 94 Crow, only with a modern take on it, and that actually worked. That I was like, oh, these songs kind of are cool. They kind of fit the vibe and the spirit of the Crow. But everything else just was so, I don't know. It was just all over the place as far as the soundtrack, and the soundtrack didn't feel cohesive. And the look of the Crow fell flat. I mean, it just, like I said, it felt like a dollar store knockoff of Brandon Lee's The Crow and The Crow from the graphic novel, which were, not the same. They were different. The Brandon Lee version of Eric Draven's The Crow was different from the James O'Barr version in the graphic novels, but they felt like they had the same soul. They felt like they came from the same place. This did not. They had Bill Skarsgård with this Jadis from The Walking Dead looking haircut. Looks like he should be in one of the new Mad Max films with that hairdo. And lame makeup that didn't look like the Crow. It looked like the sad version of the Crow, because Bill Skarsgård's Eric Draven is sad. Well, he's not Eric Draven in this. That's just from the 94. But his version of Eric is sad, and he's got to look sad to emulate that. And he's wearing nylon track pants, and it looked ridiculous. It looked like bad Crow cosplay. Like somebody that's never read the graphic novel or seen the 94 version of The Crow, but they've heard about it. So this is their idea of what a cosplay of The Crow would look like. Now, I will say, like I said, there were a couple things that I didn't mind. A couple bright points in this. If you can say there are any, Josette Simon, who played Shelley's mother, Sophia, she's a fantastic actress. I really enjoyed her performance. Not that she was in it much, but she had one scene, that scene where Eric tells her that he's gonna kill them all, kill all the people that hurt Shelley. She did a really good job. Danny Houston's a good actor. Don't get me wrong. The character is ill-conceived, but he did a good job with the character. It was a Danny Houston villain. And if you've seen any Danny Houston villain, you know what you're getting. And he did a good job with that. As far as everything else, I just didn't care about. None of the other characters were of any consequence. And your two main characters, F.K. Twigs, she just wasn't that great an actress for this. Not enough to make me care about her. And Bill Skarsgård, I'm going to have to say it's probably part on him, part on the direction, and part on the writing, that this character of Eric was just flat. And I didn't care about this character. Not the way I cared about the Eric that was portrayed by Brandon Lee in the 94. That character gave me something to care about. That's a character that I want to go hang out with. I want to go see his band play. I want to go hang out with him, have a couple beers after the show. I want to hang out with that version of Eric. This version of Eric, I didn't want to be around him, because he seemed like one of those guys that just always fucking bringing you down because he's so sad, because I don't know why. They had one scene at the beginning of the movie that was so nonsensical. It's a young Eric and flashing back to him finding a horse all wrapped in barbed wire. Now, that is an actual callback to the graphic novel. There is a scene with a horse running into barbed wire, getting all wrapped up. That is a callback to that. So it's one of the few things that actually came from the graphic novel. But this scene had no real reason. And I almost wonder, this is a hour and 50 minutes of runtime. I have to imagine there was a longer cut of this. There was probably closer to 2 hours worth of movie, if not more, that they cut back. So that scene, they left it in, and it made no goddamn sense, because it had nothing to do with the story. It had nothing to do with why he's always sad, and it's a character that I just don't care about. And as much as Bill Skarsgård, I like him as an actor, he could not save this role. And the other thing I really liked about this movie is that one fight scene. The opera fight scene was really bloody and brutal and gory. That's the thing about the 94 adaptation of The Crow. It's not a very bloody or gory film at all. The graphic novel is quite gruesome. It is quite graphic, if to pardon the pun, but it is a very bloody adaptation. I should say the graphic novels is very bloody and gruesome. The 94 adaptation didn't go that route. It didn't need to. I think it really focused on all the right things that made the story good, and you could do that and get away with not being very graphic. This had a lot of the graphic nature of the original comic series, but that was about it. The fight scene was really good. There was a lot of really good kills in that, but it was all like henchmen that I didn't fucking care about whether they died or not, because they didn't have anything to do with the story. They didn't have anything to do with Eric's revenge storyline. And it was just killing for killing's sake. It was just gruesome for gruesome's sake. Like I said, getting that sword pushed through the guy's mouth and making him have like a big animated mouth, that was gruesome. The sword through the eye was disgusting. The guy's head on the stair and Eric like stomping on his neck and breaking it and bending it that way, that was gruesome. There's a lot of good scenes. It was a good fight scene. It was all henchmen that had no bearing on the story whatsoever. It's like, how many secret security can Danny Houston's character bring to an opera that we can have them die? And that was all that was. So ultimately, like I said, I just did not like this movie. I thought it was a poor man's adaptation of The Crow, much like how Eric, his look as The Crow, felt like somebody who didn't know the graphic novel, who didn't know the 94 film, how, if somebody told them about The Crow, this would be their interpretation of it. That's what this movie felt like in and of itself. Somebody who never read the graphic novel, who never saw the 94 adaptation, but people told them about it, and this is how they imagined the movie must have gone, or how the movie should have gone. And there lies a problem I have with a lot of adaptations. This movie has the same problem that a lot of modern Stephen King adaptations have, in that you have a filmmaker who thinks they know how to do the story better, and it's not better. You gotta stick with what brought you to the dance. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do the graphic novel word for word, because Alex Proyas didn't do the graphic novel word for word, but it felt like it was from the same soul. It was a reincarnation of the same soul as the graphic novel. And that's why it worked. That's why it's so beloved by fans. And James O'Barr, who had problems with the Hollywoodization of his graphic novel, still enjoys Brandon Lee's performance, and I think still enjoys this movie, the 94 adaptation. Now, this new adaptation, this movie had no spirit of the original comic series. It didn't have the spirit of James O'Barr's original graphic novel, and you could have done that. You could have brought it a lot closer to the graphic novel. That way, it would have been different from the 94 Brandon Lee Crow movie, directed by Alex Proyas. You could have been different from that. You could have differentiated yourself from that, but done it different. And like I said, make it a little closer to the graphic novel. You would have had a completely different movie, and fans would have been a lot happier. You could have done The Crow to look like The Crow, and people would have been a lot happier with this. When I first found out Bill Skarsgård was going to be playing Eric, I was really excited, because I thought, okay, if he has some kind of longer hair and in the face makeup, and he's, he can do brooding and all of that very well, I thought this is going to be fun. I was hoping maybe they'd play more into the insanity, because that's one of the things I loved about Brandon Lee's performance, is that you got the fun and happy side of him, but you also got the sad side of him missing his dead fiance. You also got a little touch into the insanity of the Eric character that you get in the graphic novel. I thought if we could have delved into that insanity a little more, that would have been really fun. And I thought, Bill Skarsgård could do that. But that is not the way that Rupert Sanders and the writers, Balin and Schneider, went with this. And I think it's a real detriment to this movie that they decided to go so far from the source material that, you had a movie that isn't anything like the original adaptation of Alex Proyas, but you also have something that doesn't look anything like the original graphic novel that James O'Barr wrote and created these characters for, or at least this character. It doesn't really have any of the other characters. It doesn't have Captain Hook. It doesn't have Sherry. It doesn't have Albrecht. It doesn't have any of the gang. You could have brought in the Skull Cowboy. You could have played the Crow like in the graphic novel, where there is no actual real bird. It is all a figment of Eric's imagination. This spirit guide Crow is all in his mind. Only, I think T-Bird sees him at one point towards the end finally, but as he's getting ready to go into the great beyond. But you could have done this movie different from the 94 adaptation and still kept it close, or even brought it closer to the graphic novel, and it would have been a really good movie. But Rupert Sanders and the writers decided not to do that, and we got this abomination of The Crow, which, there were a lot of sequels. You had The Crow City of Angels, which actually was in theaters. You had The Crow Salvation, The Crow Wicked Prayer. I think both of those were direct-to-videos, and each successive Crow sequel felt like more and more of a cheap knockoff of the original. And that's what this feels like. This feels like it could have been, if it wasn't for the stars like Bill Skarsgård and Danny Huston in this, you would think this was a direct-to-video adaptation of The Crow. Just another long line in less than sequels. And that's sad, because a lot of people were really looking forward to this. It makes me wonder what we could have got if some of those other actors, Bradley Cooper, Luke Evans, Jason Momoa, I know Tom Hiddleston was on board to play Eric at one point, And some of these other filmmakers, you wonder how much closer to the source material, or at least the 94 adaptation, that they would have brought this film to, and we didn't get that, and we got this, and it's really a huge disappointment, especially being such a big fan of the original Crow graphic novel and the Crow 94 adaptation with Brandon Lee, directed by Alex Proyas. Love that film. One of my favorite films of all time. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I don't think so. And judging by what a lot of other people are saying about this movie, I'm not the only one that thinks this movie blows goats. Those are my thoughts on the 2024 adaptation of The Crow that's out in theaters now. A movie that I went into hoping it was going to be better than I thought it was going to be, and I left feeling like I liked it less than I thought I would. Don't take my word for it, though. Go check it out for yourself. You might like this. It may be right up your alley. Maybe you don't give a shit about the 94 Crow. You weren't even born yet. Or maybe you've never read the graphic novel, so you don't care if it's exactly like that. You're just looking for a good fight scene. Well, it's got at least one of those. I thought we might get more, but we got one fight scene, and you might dig that. So go check it out for yourself. Go check out more about what's going on with Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe on our Facebook and Instagram pages. Like, follow, subscribe to it. Leave those reviews. 5 stars would be awesome. Leave your comments, questions, anything on our social media pages or wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. And share it with anyone that you know that loves horror, fantasy, and science fiction. So until next time,